In Wisconsin, dismembered human remains are found along a river's edge. To solve this murder, investigators must first find a way to identify the victim. The body of a decomposed man is found in an Arizona state park. Only advanced computer technology can lead detectives to his killer. After finding skeletal remains, Texas police arrest a suspect in the murder. But unless the victim can be quickly identified, detectives will be forced to set a killer free. Some killers believe that by concealing the identity of their victims, their crimes will go unpunished. But with advanced technology, forensic artists are identifying faceless victims and exposing a killer's guilt by drawing conclusions. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Outside the city limits of Madison, the serene landscape of Sauk County, Wisconsin is a popular destination for people looking to enjoy the outdoors. Around 4 p.m. on July 30th, 1999, a woman and her son were hiking a trail along the shores of the Wisconsin River. The young boy noticed a plastic grocery bag at the water's edge. A closer look revealed the skeletal remains of a human hand. The mother quickly summoned police. Officers from the Sauk County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. The hand was still attached to the arm, which had been precisely severed at the shoulder joint. Unsure what to make of the finding, police decided to spread out and search the area. Scattered along the shoreline, they discovered several trash bags. Inside were more human remains. Detectives recovered the head and torso of what appeared to be an African-American woman. Her face and scalp had been sliced from the skull.
17-1.
All of the unidentified remains were collected and sent on for a more detailed analysis. For Detective Joe Welch of the Sauk County Sheriff's Department, the measures taken by the killer to conceal the victim's identity were telling.
The skin had been removed and placed in a separate garbage bag. It appeared that it was removed in a skillful fashion, that the person that was doing it knew what they were doing.
To find the killer, investigators knew they would first have to identify the victim. By studying the remains, the medical examiner concluded that the woman was 5 feet 1 to 5 feet 3 inches tall and was likely between the ages of 18 and 25. The level of decomposition suggested she had been dead for at least 5 days. Examiners were able to obtain fingerprints from the victim's hands. Hoping the prints were on file, investigators ran them through the FBI's National Fingerprint Database. But there were no matches. Sauk County Sheriff Randy Stamen would have to find another way to give this victim a name.
We initially thought that we'd be able to generate fingerprints and make a comparison and identify the body of the victim, feeling that if we could make that identification, we'd have a very good chance of solving the crime. When that failed, then the next step, obviously, was to put out a physical description and a photograph. The problem we had there was that we didn't have a face on our victim.
flesh that remained on the victim's skull held the only clues to the woman's identity. And investigators knew that sending the severed head to a forensic artist for a facial reconstruction would destroy that evidence. But scientists at the Milwaukee School of Engineering believed they could help. They requested a CAT scan of the woman's head. Engineers believed that by using the CAT scan, they could possibly create an exact three-dimensional paper replica of the skull, which could then be used by a forensic artist to reconstruct the victim's likeness. And no evidence would be destroyed in the process. Engineering professor Dr. Lisa Milkowski.
In this case, we're trying to produce a replica that looks like and is very similar to an actual skull. And the paper layers look like, feel like an actual skull.
First, engineers had to convert the data from the CAT scan into a computerized three-dimensional model. The resulting information was then transferred onto a disk. Next, the data was subjected to a process called rapid prototyping. Normally, rapid prototyping technology is used to test engineering designs that have been created on the computer. The process converts the computer model into an actual three-dimensional replica made of laminated paper, allowing engineers to analyze it for design flaws. The process had never been used in a forensic setting. First, the three-dimensional model of the skull was broken down into flat two-dimensional layers. Then, carbon dioxide lasers began precisely tracing each layer onto a sheet of paper. Each unique cutout is then layered on top of each other, fused together with glue.
The layering process that is used when constructing an object with rapid prototyping is similar to thinking about slices in a loaf of bread. The entire loaf is three-dimensional in nature, but each slice is flat. The same thing is done when we construct an object with paper layers. We start out with a single paper layer, just like a sheet of paper, and the laser traces out the shape on that single layer. And as all these layers are stacked together, each one having a unique cutout, we come up with this three-dimensional object.
The resulting block of paper is whittled down until the replica is all that remains. 40 hours later, nearly 10,000 sheets of laminated paper had gone into creating an exact paper reproduction of the victim's skull. Investigators decided to send the replica several hundred miles away to the Kentucky State Crime Lab. There, Dr. Emily Craig, a renowned forensic anthropologist and a leader in facial reconstruction, was asked to put a face on the paper skull.
The possibility of doing a clay reconstruction on a prototype skull was actually kind of exciting. To my knowledge, I don't think anyone in this country had done it for victim identification.
To bring this victim to life, Dr. Craig attached tissue depth markers to several different points on the skull. These markers reflect the average thickness of skin for people of similar race, age, and sex. Before molding the facial features, however, Dr. Craig has to be certain that the eyes selected will be of the same size and shape as those of individuals similar to the victim. Guided by the spatial arrangements of the victim's skull, the eyes are precisely set into place. In order to generate recognition from the public, the spacing and the gaze of the eyes has to be perfect. Once completed, Dr. Craig began bringing Jane Doe to life by modeling her face using an oil-based clay.
The fine detail as to the lids and the nose and the lips, that's basically where the artistic skills supersede or complement the scientific data. You really need both to do a good facial reconstruction.
After dozens of hours, the face of the murder victim began to take shape. Variations of the victim's appearance were photographed, and the clay model was sent to police in Sauk County. Investigators quickly released the photographs through the media. Still, weeks passed without a lead. But then, a woman named Sherry contacted police. She said the face in the poster bore an uncanny resemblance to a 25-year-old woman named Muvano Kupaza.
All right, here it is.
Muvano, she said, had come to the United States from Tanzania to study English.
What do you think?
Muvano was a relative of Sherry's ex-husband, Peter Kupaza, who was also from Tanzania. Though the three lived together for some time, Muvano began having problems at the couple's residence. Sherry learned that while the three were living together, Peter had become abusive towards his cousin. Late at night, while Sherry was asleep, he would sneak into Muvano's room. There, he raped the 25-year-old exchange student repeatedly, threatening to kill her if she ever told anyone.
Definitely was abusive, and
She told police that when Muvano told her what was going on, Sherry left her husband.
This was in 97.
A few weeks later, Muvano decided to return home. Police now believe that the young woman never made it back to Tanzania. Looking to verify that Muvano was the murder victim, detectives went door to door throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors agreed that the reconstructed face resembled Muvano Kupaza.
How are you?
Police questioned her 40-year-old cousin, Peter. He denied any knowledge of the murder. And he viewed photographs of the victim's reconstructed face with a total lack of recognition.
I showed him a poster. I asked him if that looked like anyone he knew. He said it didn't look like anyone he knew at all.
Though Peter claimed he had no pictures of his cousin, he agreed to turn over 2 photo albums. He added that he had recently spoken to Muvano's father in Tanzania. He was told that his cousin had made it home and was doing fine. Looking to verify the story, investigators contacted Muvano's family in Tanzania. According to her father, Muvano had never returned home, and he hadn't heard from her in some time.
They look really good.
Peter Kupaza had been caught in a lie. Detectives began digging into his background. Kupaza, they learned, had worked for several years as a butcher. Though that did not prove murder, it went a long way in explaining the precision in which the victim's remains had been severed. Believing the dismembered victim found at the Wisconsin River was Muvano Kupaza, investigators shifted their focus to building a murder case against her cousin, Peter. With the help of forensic anthropologist Dr. Emily Craig, investigators in Sauk County, Wisconsin believed they had finally identified dismembered human remains as belonging to 25-year-old Tanzanian native Muvano Kupaza. And statements made by the young woman's relatives led police to believe that her cousin, 40-year-old Peter Kupaza, was behind the brutal murder and dismemberment. Before they could prove murder, however, police needed irrefutable proof that the victim found at the Wisconsin River was Muvano Kupaza. They tracked down her local doctor. Police collected the young woman's medical records, hopeful they contained the information needed to make a positive identification. They were in luck.
We were able to get some forms that she had filled out, and she touched to fill these forms out. We took these forms to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, where they did processing and actually were able to locate latent fingerprints on those forms and compared them to our deceased and found that this was our deceased, and she was identified as Movano Kupaza.
To make their case against Peter, police contacted his ex-wife Sherry the following day. Though the suspect denied having any photos of Movano, Sherry discovered 3 pictures of her in her ex-husband's photo album. And they bore a striking similarity to Emily Craig's facial reconstruction. With a search warrant in hand, police and forensic technicians returned to Peter Kupaza's residence. Now they were looking to uncover physical proof of murder. In the bathroom, they believed they found it. On a section of the baseboard, they observed reddish-brown stains that appeared to be blood. The section was removed for future DNA testing. Investigators turned to forensic examiners for proof that Peter Kupaza had murdered his cousin. Examiners generated a genetic profile of the blood found in Kupaza's bathroom. When that was compared to the DNA recovered from the victim's flesh, they found an identical match. Peter Kupaza was arrested and charged with murder. Based on the evidence, investigators believe that Movano began threatening to expose her cousin's sexual abuse. And Peter Kupaza would do anything to keep that from happening. After killing her, police believe he dragged the young woman's body into the bathroom, where he dismembered her. Then he tried to dispose of the remains by dumping them in the Wisconsin River. On June 22, 2000, Peter Kupaza was sentenced to life in prison for the first-degree murder of his cousin, Movano. In Wisconsin, the willingness to adapt a high-tech engineering process to crime solving led to the conviction of a brutal killer. To solve a murder in Phoenix, Arizona, police must rely on computer software to help them identify the victim. North of the city of Phoenix, on the evening of February 17, 1996, a hunter walking along a trail in the Tonto National Forest noticed something lying just inside the tree line. He approached the object, believing it to be an injured animal. But what he found was a lifeless human body. The man fled the scene and called 911. Deputies from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to the scene. The victim, determined to be a white male, had suffered a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. But with no form of identification located, police were unable to determine who he was or why he had been murdered. And the level of decomposition had made it difficult to discern any identifiable facial features. The only clues to this victim's identity were a cowboy hat with a bullet hole just above the brim and a pair of prescription glasses. The following day, Maricopa County investigators were no closer to identifying the victim. But for Sergeant Keith Moore, mud stains found on the victim's clothes provided a clue as to when the murder had occurred.
Well, earlier in that week, we'd experienced rain in the area. There were some indications from the mud on the clothing that the body was there before the rain because of the mud that was splashed up on the clothing on the pants legs.
The medical examiner determined that the victim had been dead at least 10 days. Cause of death was a large caliber gunshot wound to the man's head, fired at close range. He was determined to be between the ages of 45 and 55, standing about 6 feet tall. But other than fingerprints, no identifying features remained. Decomposition had left his face unrecognizable. Until police could positively identify this victim, finding his killer would be nearly impossible. Police in Maricopa County, Arizona, continued trying to identify the decomposed body of a middle-aged white male who was found shot to death in the Tonto National Forest. Detectives began scouring recently filed missing persons reports, hoping to find one that matched their victim. But none were found. And the victim's fingerprints, which were recovered at autopsy, did not exist on any law enforcement database. Homicide detective Barry Lynch worked the case.
Once we ran through our normal operating procedures, investigating procedures, fingerprints, the autopsy, everything that we possibly could do, we came to the conclusion that we had exhausted all our normal investigative tools that we have at our disposal, and we were going to have to go someplace else and look into doing something different to try and make this case or try and identify this individual.
Detectives turned to examiners at the nearby Glendale Police Department. There, forensic artist John Wintrow was assigned the case. By applying specially designed computer software to photographs of a victim's face, Wintrow has become an expert in erasing the effects of trauma and decomposition. Having a clear image of the victim's likeness makes it more likely that someone will recognize the face.
In this case, it's a matter of using these tools to eliminate and clean up the original photograph, the original picture being scanned, to get rid of the decomposition, to get rid of the trauma, and take that image, which is once graphic, and turn it into a presentable image for the media so that it can assist in the identification of this person.
Before beginning the reconstruction in this case, however, Wintrow had to first photograph the face of the victim found in the Tonto National Forest.
When you're taking photographs of the victim's face, ideally what you would like to have is what's referred to as a Frankfurt plane, which is just almost a portrait-like, eyes front, even keeled facial shot. In doing so, in the process, you have to keep into consideration that you're going to be scanning this photograph in.
Wintrow next photographed the cowboy hat and prescription glasses that were recovered from the crime scene, careful to use the same scale as the photographs of the victim's face.
Taking a Polaroid at arm's length away gives me a form of measurement so that when I'm taking photographs of glasses and cowboy hats and other items that are going to be scanned in on the photograph, I have a distance of measurement.
Investigators hoped that by layering such details onto the reconstructed face, it would become more likely that someone would recognize the victim. After scanning all of the photos into the computer, Wintrow was ready to begin the reconstruction. His first step was to use the computer software to eliminate the trauma and decomposition present on the victim's face.
Taking those graphic images away starts off with finding a good piece of tissue, a good piece of skin that is not decomposed. And by taking a tool referred to as clone pipe in this program, I can take this large circle, which is placed over the tissue that is not decomposed or not exhibiting trauma, and then taking the small circle and cloning the good tissue over the bad tissue, or skin in this case.
Then, using a smoothing tool, Wintrow blended all of the skin tones together until no traces of damaged tissue remained. In the final step of the process, the victim's prescription glasses and cowboy hat were layered onto the image. Finally, a week after the unidentified victim was found murdered, the forensic artist had given him a face. Maricopa County detectives quickly released the victim's image to the media. Within a few hours, John Wintrow's efforts paid off. A local resident, John Christian, recognized the victim as being 52-year-old Thomas Donahue.
Now, I know Sue works at the grocery store.
He hadn't seen or heard from Tom in some time.
See if I could find anything, if I heard anything about this girl.
He described his friend as a simple but nice man who was always eager to gain the acceptance of people around him. John Christian told police that Tom, who was employed as a security guard for a local company, lived with a woman named Darlene Schlicht. Though Darlene and her friends were rumored to be involved in criminal activity, including forgery and check fraud scams, Tom tried to fit in with the group. Christian had heard that one of those friends, Carrie Scott, seemed to resent Tom's efforts to include himself in their activities.
I think it's 23rd.
Christian hadn't seen Darlene or any of her friends in some time.
Her Aunt Sue works at...
Looking to prove that the victim was in fact Thomas Donahue, detectives contacted his employer.
Got some information about the case?
Tom, they said, had not shown up for work in several weeks. Donahue's fingerprints were on file, and his employers agreed to forward them to the crime lab. Examiners compared the known prints of Thomas Donahue to those recovered from the victim. They matched. Thomas Donahue was officially the victim of a homicide. Now, looking to identify his killer, investigators began tracking down his roommate, Darlene Schlicht, for information. But she was nowhere to be found. A records check soon explained why. 3 days after Thomas Donahue's body was found, Darlene Schlicht had been arrested on forgery charges in nearby Tempe, Arizona.
And have them come on down.
According to the reports, Darlene had tried to pass a check at a cafe using an account that had been closed for several months. It turns out the account was in the name of Thomas Donahue. After being turned over to police, Darlene was placed under arrest and transported to the Tempe jail. Though the finding was incriminating, it didn't prove that Darlene had committed murder. Police hoped that Carrie Scott, Darlene's alleged accomplice in the forgery scams, would have information about the homicide. But she was difficult to track down. A short while later, investigators got a tip that Carrie Scott was staying at a nearby motel. The woman who answered the door told police that Carrie wasn't there.
I'd like to speak with Carrie Scott, please.
But they didn't believe her. Police began searching the room. In the bathroom, they found Carrie hiding in the shower. She was placed under arrest on unrelated outstanding warrants. At the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, investigators questioned Carrie about Darlene's role in the murder of Thomas Donahue. At first, she was uncooperative. But after some time, Carrie decided to talk. She admitted to being present at the time of the killing, and she confirmed that Darlene Schlicht had committed the murder. According to Carrie, one night a few weeks back, she, Darlene, and another friend went out for a drive to the Tonto National Forest with Tom. As they made their way to a hiking trail, Darlene grabbed a handgun that Tom had brought along, ran up behind him, and shot him in the back of the head. Though Carrie Scott claimed she had no idea that Darlene was planning to kill Tom, the murder didn't surprise her. Darlene had recently told her that Tom knew too much about their forgery scams, and she wanted to do away with him.
After hearing the version of the incident from Carrie Scott, then we had to find other individuals and other suspects that were involved in the case to be able to confirm or deny her version of the story.
Police tracked down the third woman said to be present when the murder occurred. At first, Erica Land denied any knowledge of the killing. But when she learned Carrie Scott had told police she was there, Erica broke down. But she had a different story to tell. According to Erica, it was Carrie Scott and not Darlene Schlicht who had pulled the trigger. Erica said she had not been included in the planning of the murder. In exchange for her testimony, investigators agreed not to arrest her. Unsure what to make of the conflicting stories, detectives traveled to the Tempe jail to interview Darlene Schlicht. Like Erica Land, Darlene blamed the murder on Carrie Scott. Darlene admitted that she had helped plan the murder.
They decided that Mr. Donahue wants to involve himself in our criminal activity, and out of a conversation that they had at Darlene's apartment, they conspired to go ahead and take him to some remote area in the county and kill Mr. Donahue.
Didn't Lila tell you?
Though police had no physical evidence to corroborate the testimony, they were now convinced that Carrie Scott's version of events was a lie.
Carrie Scott spent a good deal of her time trying to figure ways to isolate herself or remove herself from her involvement in this particular case. So there was a stark contrast between the two. And having interviewed the other principals involved in the case and some of the other witnesses, they all tend to corroborate what Darlene Schlicht had stated.
Police believe that Thomas Donahue tried to get involved in the group's criminal activity. But Carrie Scott and Darlene Schlicht didn't trust him, and they decided to kill him. On February 7th, 1996, they lured him to an isolated spot at the Tonto National Forest. As he walked along a trail, Carrie Scott approached him from behind and shot him once in the head. They believed that prolonged exposure to the elements would keep his identity and their crime a mystery. Carrie Scott stood trial for the first-degree murder of Thomas Donahue. She was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Darlene Schlicht was also tried and sentenced to life in prison.
The composite that Mr. Winthrop provided to us was crucial in this case because it was the means by which someone was able to identify Mr. Donahue. Without that, we would have probably never found the identity of Mr. Donahue or the principal players involved in this case.
With the aid of computer software, forensic artist John Winthrop was able to restore a victim's appearance and help bring two killers to justice. In Texas, police must rely on a renowned forensic artist to identify a faceless victim. In the late afternoon hours of July 18, 1989, a young boy playing near a lake in Wills Point, Texas, stumbled upon some debris that had washed ashore. Curious as to what he had found, he began poking at the trash. When it flipped over, he saw that it was a human skull wrapped in cloth. Frightened, the boy ran to tell his father. After receiving the 911 call, deputies from the Van Zandt County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to Willow Lake. There, they located the human skull and a pair of blue denim shorts scattered on the ground. Rope had been used to bind the items. Police carefully collected the remains and a few stray red hairs lying nearby. Having found no other clues to the victim's identity, investigators forwarded what little evidence they had recovered to forensic examiners. From the level of decay, examiners determined that the remains had been lying outdoors for at least a year. And evidence of blunt force trauma found on the skull suggested the victim had been murdered. Further analysis led to the conclusion that the victim was a Caucasian female, but little else was learned. Captain Rock Ellis of the Van Zandt County Sheriff's Office was contacted with the autopsy results. It was clear this would be a difficult case to solve.
Forensics is telling me, that the lady is somewhere between 20 and 40 years old. She had red hair. And that's about all we had to go on at that time.
As investigators struggled to identify the victim, dispatchers received a 911 call. More human remains had been found. Because of the decreased water level at Willow Lake, a passerby had stumbled upon a partial skeleton lying in the mud. It was found less than 200 feet away from where the skull had been found. Chicken wire surrounded the remains. The caging had been tied to concrete blocks with electrical wire and rope, likely used to keep the remains submerged in the lake. And there was something else. It appeared the ropes had been tied with the same type of knots as those found with the skull. Forensic analysis later confirmed that these remains were at one time attached to the skull found a week earlier. Though the findings had provided investigators with additional evidence of murder, the identity of this victim and her killer remained a mystery. Police in Van Zandt County, Texas, struggled to identify female skeletal remains found scattered along the shores of Willow Lake. As police began canvassing the nearby neighborhood, they made a startling discovery in one of the yards. Lying next to a roll of chicken wire, police noticed some ropes. They were the same type and tied with the same knots as those found with the skeletal remains.
The same knots were tied on all three places. A clove hitch is not unique, a bowline is not unique, but when you see those knots tied with the same type of material in three different places, it focuses in on the same person tying the knots.
Though no one was home, police obtained a warrant and collected the evidence. Now they needed to find out who lived at that residence. A property search revealed that the house belonged to an elderly couple who lived there with their 38-year-old son, Ronald Mark Holloway. And a records check indicated that Holloway was currently on parole for the sexual assault and attempted murder of a woman in another state.
I contacted the officer that worked the case, and during our conversations, he gave me a lot of insight into Holloway. And he also read me part of a statement that Holloway made, in which he said that if he did this again, he would cut the person up and put him in the water.
Though investigators had few clues to the identity of the woman found at the lake, they believed they had a suspect in her murder.
What's this all about?
Less than 2 months later, the elusive suspect, Ronald Holloway, was finally located in a nearby county and brought in for questioning. He admitted that he had tied the knots on the rope found at his parents' home. But he denied any knowledge of the murder. Detectives sensed that he was lying. Though their case was circumstantial, they decided to place Ronald Holloway under arrest for suspicion of murder.
I was afraid that if I didn't make my move then, that he would be a long time before I saw him again. So I figured I'd get him while I could.
But with Holloway's arrest, investigators found a new challenge. Because of a Texas law, they had only a short period of time in which to formally charge the suspect with murder. Sergeant Steve Black of the Texas Rangers was asked to assist in the investigation.
In Texas at that time, we had what they call a Speedy Trial Act. And if you didn't bring your defendant to trial within that time, well, you were in serious trouble. The defendant would be gone.
Having only 60 days to make their case, investigators turned to renowned forensic artist Karen Taylor for help. With only a skull to work with, Taylor combined science and art in order to accurately reconstruct the features and fine details that make each face unique.
The advantage in putting a face on a skull is that arrangement is given there in the skull. The openings exist already, the various orifices of the skull are there, and the features have to be placed over them, and so the proportions are built in. It's the spatial arrangement of those features that has proven in study after study to be critical for triggering recognition.
Taylor begins by photographing the skull with 21 tissue depth markers placed at precise points. Tracing paper is then laid over the life-size photographs of the skull. Using the rubber markers as her guide, Taylor began shaping the contours of this victim's face. Once complete, the next step is to draw in the eyes, nose, mouth, and other features that will potentially lead to the identity of the victim.
There are certain ways to calculate the individual features. There's a formula for each feature for the development of the eye and determination of the width of the nose or the projection of the nose or the width of the mouth and so forth.
Using established scientific data to approximate the size and shape of the victim's features, Taylor next looked to other evidence recovered from the crime scene to help her fine-tune her drawing.
A pair of blue jean shorts were recovered that were size 26-inch waist, indicating a really slender individual. So I knew that I needed to slenderize the face somewhat, so I actually shaded in the cheek area to make the finished reconstruction drawing look more slender.
Karen Taylor had taken a faceless skull and created the image of a young woman, hopeful it would lead to her name and the name of her killer.
The forensic artist has the ability to develop a face that gives that individual who's a victim of violent crime one last opportunity to be identified, and that's the reason we do what we do.
Hoping this would generate the lead they needed to link Ronald Holloway to the murder victim, investigators quickly released the sketch through the media. Within a few hours, they got a tip. A caller recognized the sketch as resembling 28-year-old Jennifer D. Weiniger, who shared a house with her boyfriend in nearby Elmo, Texas. Police went to the address. Ray Dawson agreed that the sketch he had seen in the paper looked like his girlfriend. Police asked him for a photograph of Jennifer.
Yeah, pretty happy.
The picture of the girl was a dead ringer of the artist rendering Karen had fixed for us.
We've been together for the past 2 years.
Around the time Jennifer disappeared, Dawson said he was in jail on traffic violations. And though he hadn't heard from her since, he didn't think much of it. In the past, Jennifer would ask him to drive her to the local bus station. She was a free spirit and enjoyed being out on the road. In fact, she would often take off on hitchhiking trips across the country and be gone for months at a time. Police specifically asked him about Jennifer's friends and associates. But Dawson didn't know anyone named Ronald Holloway. Believing they had finally identified their homicide victim, authorities retrieved Jennifer Weiniger's dental records and compared them to the remains found at the lake. It was a perfect match. Though Karen Taylor's facial reconstruction had led to a positive identification of the remains found at Willow Lake, investigators were no closer to proving Ronald Holloway was the killer. And under Texas law, police only had a few days left before they would have to release the suspect. Unless they could find a way to connect him directly to the victim, Holloway might just get away with murder. With the help of forensic artist Karen Taylor, authorities in Van Zandt County, Texas, had finally identified skeletal remains as 28-year-old murder victim Jennifer Weiniger. Though authorities had established a physical link between evidence found at the crime scenes and the home of Ronald Holloway, they struggled to tie the suspect directly to the victim. And they had only a few more days to prove he was the killer. Otherwise, they would be forced by Texas law to set him free. Hoping to uncover a connection between the suspect and the victim, police began canvassing Jennifer's Elmo, Texas neighborhood. A clerk at a local convenience store knew Jennifer well. She used to come into the store several times a week. And there was more. Captain Rock Ellis.
About the time that she disappeared, he told me that Jennifer was at the store. Holloway pulled in, and he was pretty well known because he had at that time a pretty flashy red truck, and that he talked to her outside the store that evening about 10 o'clock, and that she got in the truck, and they left together. I tried very hard to find anyone who had seen her after that night, and couldn't.
Under questioning, Ronald Holloway insisted he didn't know anyone named Jennifer Weiniger. Police knew that was a lie. Though all the evidence against him was circumstantial, investigators felt they had enough to finally win a murder conviction. Police believe that in August of 1988, the rage Holloway had asserted towards women in the past resurfaced soon after he and Jennifer began a relationship. Using a blunt object, he beat Jennifer Weiniger to death and then disposed of her remains in Willow Lake. On January 30th, 1990, Ronald Mark Holloway was convicted of the murder of Jennifer D. Weiniger. He received a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. When solving a murder, homicide investigators rely on the victim's identity to lead them to a suspect. But to give a faceless victim a name, police turn to forensic artists who can expose a killer's guilt by drawing conclusions. A quiet Washington state community becomes the backdrop for a string of brutal murders. And all of the evidence suggests that a serial killer is responsible. As investigators struggle to identify a suspect, more bodies continue to surface. In Michigan, the pregnant wife of a promising young attorney is found dead in the couple's home. Though it appears to be the result of a tragic accident, police are not convinced. It falls to forensic examiners to expose the truth. Solving a murder requires a team of experts whose efforts often go unrecognized. When crime fighters meet crime writers, their story is finally told. And many times, it's a tale stranger than fiction. Bellevue, Washington lies just east of the city of Seattle. It's a thriving community of about 100,000 people who live, work, and play here. But in the summer of 1990, young women began turning up dead throughout the city. On Saturday, June 23rd, Bellevue police received a 911 call. A restaurant employee had stumbled upon the lifeless body of a young woman. Investigators responded to the scene. They found the victim lying among trash next to a dumpster behind the restaurant. She was nude except for a necklace. Her arms and legs were positioned as if she were lying in a coffin. A pine cone rested in her hands. It was clear that the victim's body had been posed by the killer. Technicians managed to locate a single black hair near the woman. But they found no clues to her identity or that of her killer. Bellevue detective Marvin Skeen was assigned the case. He knew this wasn't going to be an easy murder to solve.
Most crime scenes, you know who your victim is. In this particular crime scene, we had no idea at all who our victim was, her identification. We also lacked clothing, so we couldn't provide a clothing description when we asked the public for their assistance in determining who the victim was.
The medical examiner concluded that the woman, likely between the ages of 25 and 35, had died as a result of strangulation. She had also been brutally beaten and sexually assaulted. In addition to collecting biological evidence, dozens of fibers clinging to the victim's body were also recovered. Though it wasn't much to work with, detectives forwarded what little evidence they had to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab in nearby Tacoma. After examining the fibers under a microscope, all that scientists could conclude was that they had originated from the carpet or trunk mat of a car. Next, the black hair collected from the crime scene was analyzed, in the hopes it would provide some clue to the killer's identity. Forensic scientist Terry McAdam.
You can look at it for predominantly pigmentation, helps us to decide which possible broad racial groups it may belong to.
From the color, texture, and shape, McAdam determined that the hair had come from an African-American male. But having been found among trash and debris, its connection with the crime was uncertain. Investigators knew the best way to find this killer would be to first identify the victim. But no missing persons reports filed in the city of Bellevue matched their victim.
We went to the news media, who of course were interested in the case, asked for their assistance. We also went to teletypes and bulletins to surrounding law enforcement agencies, asking them to check for missing individuals in their cases.
Soon after, investigators got their first break. In a neighboring jurisdiction, a woman had reported her roommate missing. From photos taken at the autopsy, she identified the victim as her 27-year-old friend, Marianne Polreich. She said that she had last seen Marianne 3 nights earlier as she prepared to go out for the evening. Marianne had borrowed her roommate's necklace. It was the same one found around the victim's neck. Marianne usually spent her Fridays at a bar just a few blocks from where her body was found.
The roommate indicated to us that Marianne's personality was one that was a free spirit, and that Marianne definitely enjoyed dancing, and that she would go to the various local clubs to dance. That was her main purpose as far as recreation. We learned that Marianne was a very hard worker. We learned that also from co-workers and then from employers. But the roommate indicated to us that Marianne would not go with a stranger, someone unknowing to her.
Following up on the roommate's information, police went to the bar where Marianne spent her Friday nights. The restaurant manager knew her well, and she had been there the night before her body was discovered. Though he hadn't noticed who she was with, he believed she had left in a hurry. Marianne had forgotten her sweater and purse. Investigators collected the items, hopeful they contained some clue to her killer's identity. But the evidence failed to yield any useful information. The investigation into Marianne Polreich's murder was going nowhere. And the caseload for Bellevue detectives was about to increase. On August 9, 1990, police were dispatched to the home of Carol Beathy. Her ex-husband, Paul, had received a call from his 2 young children earlier that day. They said that their mom was locked inside her bedroom and wouldn't come out. When Paul came to the house, he discovered his 36-year-old ex-wife Carol dead inside her bedroom. It looked as though she had shot herself. When police entered the room, however, it became clear this was no suicide. Though a shotgun lay near the victim, it had not been fired. Instead, the killer had posed the victim's nude body and used the shotgun graphically as a prop. Carol Beathy had been sexually assaulted and beaten to death. But no biological evidence of rape was found. Technicians collected a few black hairs from the sheets. Though robbery did not appear to be a motive, family members later determined that Carol's heirloom ring was missing. For Bellevue homicide detective Dale Foote, the similarities between the Marianne Polreich and Carol Beathy murders had to be more than coincidental.
Bellevue is a pretty quiet suburban town, and we don't have a whole lot of homicides here, so we have 2 cases with women that are openly displayed and they're posed nude. Yeah, we're having some questions. Why are these 2 cases so similar in nature? Is there any connection between them? Do they know each other? Do their friends know each other? You know, did they work together? Did they, attend some of these nightclubs together? We just didn't know. So some of those questions we had to answer, and answer real fast.
To find out if the cases were in fact connected, police forwarded the hairs recovered from the Carol Beatty crime scene to the lab. When examiners compared those to the one recovered from the Marianne Polreich crime scene, they concluded that the hairs had originated from the same person. Bellevue police were now faced with the possibility that a serial killer was loose in their city. Looking to find a common thread between the two victims, investigators began interviewing Carol Beatty's co-workers at a popular restaurant where she had worked as a waitress. Carol's friends could not imagine why anyone would have wanted to hurt her. Though she and her ex-husband Paul were divorced, they maintained a great relationship. And Carol's two daughters constantly showered her with love and affection. Though Carol Beatty would sometimes go to nightclubs, police were unable to establish any connection between her and Marianne Polreich.
Have you ever seen her?
The two unsolved murder investigations quickly became front-page news. Soon, the mystery caught the attention of veteran crime writer Jack Olson. With 10 true crime novels to his credit, Olson recognized that as a writer, this story was too unusual to be ignored.
I think the thing that made this case unusual was the posing of the bodies. That is not seen. It is seen, but it's not seen very often. It represents some kind of a deep-seated hatred of women.
And Bellevue police feared that such a deep-seated hatred would not simply go away on its own. If they didn't identify a suspect in the killings, and fast, it would only be a matter of time until more victims turned up dead. Police in Bellevue, Washington struggled to solve the sexual assaults and murders that had claimed the lives of two young women. The bodies of 27-year-old Marianne Polreich and 36-year-old Carol Beatty were discovered less than 2 months apart. Having found both victims savagely beaten, sexually assaulted, and their bodies posed after death, investigators had reason to believe that the murders were the work of one predator. But so far, they had no idea who that was or when he would strike next. On September 3rd, 1990, police in neighboring King County received a 911 call. The body of 24-year-old Randy Levine had been discovered by her landlady. She had been savagely beaten, and her nude body was posed suggestively in her bed. Technicians located a single dark hair near the victim's body. The only item determined to be missing from the room was an antique ring. At autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that Randy Levine had died as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. Though she had also been sexually assaulted, no biological evidence was found. But the medical examiner did find evidence that the young woman had been tortured. 283 tiny puncture wounds dotted her body. The pattern of some of the injuries suggested that the killer had played a game of tic-tac-toe. Because the Levine homicide happened outside the city limits of Bellevue, its parallels to the unsolved Polreich and Beatty murders might have gone unnoticed. But then, Bellevue Police Detective Ed Mott received a call from a paramedic who happened to be called to all 3 crime scenes.
Yeah, this is Lieutenant Ed Mott with Bellevue.
And he couldn't help but notice the similarities.
He says, I'm not a cop, I'm not a policeman. He says, but the last 3 murder cases I've been to, he says, it's really odd that the 3 bodies have been posed.
Bellevue police also learned that Randy Levine had been to a Bellevue nightclub the night before she was found murdered. There could now be little doubt that a serial killer had claimed the lives of all 3 women. Officers from throughout the area began pooling their resources, desperate to identify this killer before he struck again. The senselessness of the homicides left veteran crime writer Jack Olson struggling for answers. He wondered why these women in particular had been targeted for murder. He could find no rational explanation.
They were perfectly fine women doing exactly what we would expect decent young women of their age, 20, 30, 35, to be doing. They held jobs, they were responsible. Yes, they did go to nightclubs now and then. They're admirable people.
As the hunt for the serial killer intensified, an intelligence officer with the Seattle Police Department believed he had uncovered a possible lead. A few days after the Randy Levine homicide in King County, a man named George Waterfield Russell was arrested near her residence for impersonating a police officer.
You two have been working on.
According to the reports, when 32-year-old Russell was pulled over for traffic violations, the officer saw him try to hide something under the vehicle. At first, Russell identified himself as an undercover police officer, but later recanted. Suspicious, the patrol officer searched his car. He located a police scanner, a buck knife, and 2 IDs. Hidden underneath the vehicle, he found a loaded handgun. A check of the serial numbers revealed that the gun had recently been stolen. Russell was placed under arrest for impersonating an officer and being in the possession of a stolen weapon. A records check showed that Russell had an extensive criminal record, which included sexual assaults and cat burglaries. Mostly, George Russell stole jewelry. A further background check revealed that Russell was known to frequent Bellevue area nightclubs, and he had a reputation.
Well, George was a charmer, and basically he was liked in the nightclubs. He was a popular man in the nightclubs. He had a good line of chatter. He would sidle over next to the DJ and they'd have a nice conversation, and then he'd sidle over to the bar and have a nice conversation with the bartender, and then various people, usually young women who came under his aura would sit with him, would buy him drinks, would tell him what a great guy he was.
Though that wasn't a crime, to investigators it went a long way in explaining how the 3 victims could have been manipulated into being alone with the killer.
Hey, how you doing? I'm a detective.
Detectives wanted to speak with George Russell about the murders. He claimed he didn't know anyone named Carol Beathy or Randy Levine.
Take a look at some of these pictures.
However, he admitted knowing Marianne Polreich. In fact, he had seen her at a bar the night before she was found murdered. But he said they weren't there together and didn't speak. Recalling that fibers from a vehicle had been recovered from Polreich's body, police asked for permission to search his car. Russell claimed he had borrowed a friend's truck that night. Eager to cooperate, he gave police the address of his friend who had lent him the vehicle. The man confirmed he had lent Russell his truck several months earlier. He added that when Russell returned the vehicle the following day, there were large stains on the seats, and the interior of the car reeked from a horrible smell. It was so bad, he scrubbed the truck clean later that day. For investigators looking for proof that George Russell was a serial killer, that was the worst news they could hear.
These three, we want to see if you knew any of them.
Investigators in Bellevue, Washington, believe that 32-year-old George Russell was responsible for a string of brutal sexual assaults and murders that had claimed the lives of 3 young women. Now they needed to prove it. Police located the vehicle Russell had borrowed the night that the first victim, Marianne Polwright, was killed, hopeful it contained evidence of murder. But in the days following the homicide, the truck had been thoroughly cleaned by its owner. But beneath the upholstery, technicians located a suspicious stain. It appeared to be blood. However, it was too degraded for a more comprehensive analysis. Fiber samples from the vehicle's carpet were also collected. At the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, examiners compared the fibers recovered from the truck to those collected from the body of Marianne Polwright. Though they were consistent with one another, supervising forensic scientist Terry McAdam knows that no analysis is perfect.
We can't say that that fiber came from that car, because unless we can take the exact fiber and match up its ends, we can't say that. What we can say is the fiber we found in a suspect's car matches that found on the clothing of the victim as regards to having similar microscopic characteristics. We can't say it's a match.
Still, the finding was enough to allow investigators to obtain a search warrant for the suspect's apartment. There, they found a gym bag filled with slips of paper with women's names and phone numbers written on them. Police contacted several of the women whose names were found in Russell's home. Most knew George Russell well. Though many had no idea how he got their phone numbers, they didn't feel threatened. Russell had told them he was an undercover cop. Homicide Detective Dale Foote.
We kept hearing these same stories about George working for the police and being an undercover agent and that kind of thing. George was very articulate, he was a very charismatic young man, and a lot of people bought into his story. And actually, the fact that they bought into his story kind of was a hindrance to us, because they rather trust George than they would rather trust the police.
Get up and get back with you.
But one of the women contacted felt differently, and she had an interesting story for police. She said that recently, George Russell had given her an antique ring. It was his way of apologizing for standing her up on a date the week before. Though she had suspicions that the ring had been stolen, she reluctantly accepted the gift. Shortly after that, she learned Russell was a suspect in the murders.
When she began to hear that George was involved, or possibly involved, with these homicides, she became frightened, and she gave this ring to another friend of hers who just happened to be leaving town. He was on his way to Florida, and so he took that ring with him, and having arrived down there a little short of cash, he went down to a pawn shop and pawned this ring. Fortunately, that ring was still there when we called.
Investigators confirmed that it was the same ring that had been stolen from Randy Levine's room at the time of her murder. Convinced they had the serial killer, investigators next looked to tie the suspect to the murder of Marianne Polwright. Detective Marvin Skeen decided to take advantage of a new forensic technology called DNA testing.
At the time in 1991, introducing DNA evidence into court was the first time that it had occurred in King County in the state of Washington. So it was new, very new, and It was something that had to be looked at and a lot of time spent on to make sure that we did it properly and to get it accepted by the court.
It was time well spent. On January 10, 1991, examiners determined that George Russell's DNA matched the biological samples found on Marianne Polreich. He was subsequently charged with her murder. Based on the hair analysis, he was also charged with the murders of Carol Beatty and Randy Levine. Police believe that George Russell used his abundant charm to lure women into his web. And once he had them where he wanted, he pounced on the unsuspecting victims. George Waterfield Russell was convicted of the 3 murders. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 28 years.
George is a professional listener, not because he really cares, but because that's the way he takes your defenses down and can do whatever he wants. Now, I spent 3 hours with George at Walla Walla Penitentiary, and I mean, this is one of the most horrendous killers that ever lived. But it was a delightful 3 hours. He's interesting on every subject. He's friendly. He smiles and he cracks little jokes. That's all the exterior. What there is beneath that, I don't think even George knows.
Shock value was part of George Russell's murderous plan, and he went to great lengths manipulating his crime scenes to achieve it. Oftentimes, the significant facts of a case lie just below the troubled surface. Just north of Detroit, Michigan, lies the city of Hazel Park. Its 3 square miles are home to 8,000 families, and in 1999, one ugly scandal. On the afternoon of Monday, August 16th, the Hazel Park police dispatcher received a frantic call.
What took place?
A man reported that his wife had accidentally shot herself. When the responding officer arrived a few minutes later, Michael Fletcher, a prominent local attorney, was waiting outside his home.
Where's the bedroom at in the house? Understand? Okay,
His wife was inside. He had checked for a pulse, but she wasn't breathing. He led the officer to the bedroom where his 29-year-old wife Leanne lay on the floor.
What are you gonna do?
Following protocol, the officer kept Michael Fletcher from entering the room.
What are you gonna do?
But there was nothing anyone could do. Leanne Fletcher was dead, the result of a single gunshot wound to the head.
Also, give me a backup unit and start the...
Any shooting death, even an accidental one, is treated as a crime scene. And this one was no different. Crime scene technicians began processing the room, looking for evidence to help them reconstruct what had happened. They collected the .45 caliber handgun found inches away from the victim's body. Unsure of what to make of the findings, police began searching through the contents of the victim's purse, looking for a suicide note she may have left behind. But what they found was a greeting card from her husband. He was expressing his joy over Leanne's recent pregnancy. Leanne Fletcher's body was removed for autopsy. For investigators, all of the findings suggested the expectant mother's death had resulted from a tragic accident. Police in Hazel Park, Michigan, continued to investigate the tragic shooting death that had claimed the life of 29-year-old expectant mother, Leanne Fletcher. The victim's husband, Michael Fletcher, was brought in to make a statement. The 29-year-old attorney couldn't believe that his pregnant wife was dead. Michael told police that after dropping off their 3-year-old daughter earlier that morning, he and Leanne went to a local firing range. He wanted her to learn how to properly shoot a handgun in case she ever needed to protect herself and the children. At first, Leanne was hesitant to handle the weapon. But according to Michael, she finally became comfortable and then fired a few rounds. When the couple returned home, Michael wanted to clean up and change clothes before heading off to work. He asked Leanne to load bullets into the clip and then put the weapon in its case that he kept by the side of the bed. The next thing he knew, he heard a shot and rushed out to find his wife bleeding to death. He was certain that the safety was on when he handed her the weapon. And he didn't remember that there was a round already in the chamber. As a matter of procedure, investigators collected the shirt Fletcher had been wearing at the time of the accident for testing. Though Michael Fletcher's account was consistent with an accidental shooting, as a matter of routine, investigators needed to interview the couple's friends and family members. When questioned, the victim's mother was upset and angry. She said she never trusted Michael Fletcher, and she was convinced her daughter's death was no accident. Nearly 6 months earlier, Leanne had complained to her mother she was unhappy in the marriage and wanted a divorce. When she confronted her husband, he was furious to learn she had gone so far as to hire a divorce lawyer. But soon after, Michael began trying to repair the marriage. He had just started to earn a substantial income, and the mother believed he was simply trying to avoid having to pay alimony. The information led investigators to take a closer look at Leanne's death. They forwarded the .45 caliber handgun to forensic examiners, believing it possible that the gun had misfired in the hands of an inexperienced Leanne Fletcher. Using weights attached to the trigger, they found that to successfully discharge the weapon, a significant amount of force had to be applied. It was unlikely that the gun would have accidentally gone off on its own. But that still left investigators with the possibility, however unlikely, that the expectant mother had taken her own life. At autopsy, medical examiner Dr. L.J. Dragovich looked for signs of suicide. Though large blood stains were found on the victim's hands, he could find no gunpowder residue or mist-like blood spatter, which are usually present with self-inflicted gunshot wounds.
There will be fine mist of blood created by the bullet impacting the skin and causing the wound. I would have been able to see evidence of that fine mist droplet pattern on the hand of the victim herself. That was not there.
When he examined the wound, he noticed that the size and shape of the powder burns, or stippling patterns on Leanne's head, were consistent with the weapon having been fired from less than 2 feet away. The bullet had entered from above and behind the victim's right ear. Based on his findings, Dr. Dragovich concluded that it would be nearly impossible for Leanne Fletcher to have held the gun in the position needed to account for the trajectory of the bullet.
It's very uncomfortable to try to self-inflict the injury in the way that you have to be a contortionist to be able to do that. In addition to having an arm long enough. This is not physically possible.
Though the findings were powerful, they didn't prove Michael Fletcher had killed his wife. Still, rumors began to circulate through the small community. Freelance writer Tom Henderson followed the story and conducted his own investigation. But as an outsider, he knew that uncovering the truth would not be easy.
I gathered the information by just basic reporting. You get used to, when you're a reporter, being outside your comfort zone, girding yourself up to knock on that door with people that don't really want to see you, saying, "Hi, I want to do a book about your family's tragedy. Will you cooperate?"
Slowly, people opened up to Henderson. Those close to the couple did not speak kindly about the young attorney. But they all agreed that Leanne was a supportive and dedicated mother and a wonderful human being.
Leanne Fletcher, by all accounts, was everybody's best friend. And that was one of the touching things, is you would interview friends, sisters. Everybody said, "Leanne was my best friend."
Michael Fletcher was asked to come into the station to answer questions. Stating he had nothing to hide, he agreed, but only under the watchful eye of his attorney. He admitted to police that his marriage had been shaky, but over the past several months, he said that he and Leanne had managed to reconcile their differences. In fact, just 2 days before her death, Leanne prepared a special dinner for the family. She used the occasion to have the couple's daughter announce to everyone that there was going to be a new baby in the family. Michael was elated. Though he couldn't explain the evidence surrounding Leanne's death, he insisted he was still very much in love with his wife.
In the 4 or 5 months before the shooting, they were, by all accounts, the happiest that they'd ever been. She told her family, her sisters, her friends, that he was finally being the guy that she'd wanted him to be.
Though the medical examiner's findings had led investigators to suspect foul play, they struggled to find evidence to support that theory. Police went to the shooting range where Michael had taken Leanne on the morning of her death. The manager of the range recalled the couple well. He said he never saw the victim fire the gun. And despite her husband's persistence, she refused even to handle it. That contradicted Michael Fletcher's story that Leanne fired the weapon. Investigators theorized Michael had organized the trip to the shooting range in order to get gunpowder residue on his wife's hands before he shot her. If that were the plan, it failed. But for those following the investigation, the case against Michael Fletcher was hardly clear-cut. There wasn't a shred of hard evidence that proved Fletcher had murdered his wife. And there was no obvious motive.
Mick Fletcher didn't stand to gain anything financially from her death. There was no insurance policy. The house, in fact, was in her name, and her parents ended up being responsible for its sale. His family didn't get any of the proceeds. He didn't get any of the proceeds. There was no financial gain.
However, the medical examiner's findings were enough to allow investigators to obtain a warrant to search the suspect's house. Hidden in Michael's closet, they uncovered a secret stash of emails, photographs, and love letters. But the items had nothing to do with Michael's wife, Leanne. It appeared Michael Fletcher had a mistress. And more surprisingly, she was a respected district court judge. Police in Hazel Park, Michigan suspected that the shooting death of 29-year-old expectant mother Leanne Fletcher was no accident. While looking for evidence to prove that her husband, prominent local attorney Michael Fletcher, was responsible, investigators learned he had been having an affair with a respected district court judge. Detectives went to interview the 32-year-old judge. When confronted with the evidence, she admitted she and Michael had been involved in a romantic relationship for about a year. She said she last saw Michael the night before Leanne died. He had come by her house. Michael hadn't mentioned that Leanne was pregnant. In fact, he told his mistress that he and Leanne lived like strangers, and the only reason he stayed in the marriage was for the sake of his young daughter. His true feelings were for the judge. The judge, who was also married, was tolerant of the situation, at least for the time being. But she had one condition. If she found out that Michael was being intimate with Leanne, the judge would end the relationship immediately. Hazel Park homicide detective Thomas Clayman realized he had just uncovered a possible motive.
When Mr. Fletcher found out that his wife was pregnant, caused us to believe that she could not find out, the judge could not find out, because if they were having sexual relations per her, the relationship would be over.
Detectives soon learned that it was more than just an affair that was at stake for Michael Fletcher.
In the Fletcher case, M.E. ruled it a homicide.
In her statements to police, the judge admitted that after she and Fletcher became involved, she had helped his career. She made him the court-appointed attorney in dozens of cases, more than any other local attorney. It translated into thousands of dollars of extra income for the ambitious lawyer. Crime writer Tom Henderson knew this story was as compelling as it was tragic.
This case is about a set of dynamics that you would only expect to come across in a made-for-TV movie. You've got the really good-looking young attorney. You've got the really good-looking, vivacious wife. You've got the powerful, young, pretty judge. The triangle, the classic triangle. And you've got a dead woman on a floor. It just caught everybody's attention.
This shows that he knew she was pregnant.
Though police believed they had finally established a motive, they struggled to find solid physical evidence that could prove Michael Fletcher was a cold-blooded killer.
Because I want to make sure.
But there was one item that had not been tested. The shirt Fletcher wore at the time of the shooting. After reviewing the suspect's statement, Detective Clayman realized the shirt might contain proof of the young attorney's guilt.
He stated that he was not in the room when the gunshot went off. Prosecutors wanted that shirt to test for the possibility of blood, spatter, or mist being on that shirt. From the naked eye, the shirt observed to be clean or without stain. The human eye, you could not see any of the stains. It was then taken to Michigan State Police Crime Lab.
Under a magnifying glass, examiner David Woodford could find no traces of blood. But then, on the cuff of the right sleeve, he noticed tiny mist-like stains. Looking to identify the substance, Woodford placed the shirt under a stereo microscope. Under the high-powered lens, he determined that the minute stains were in fact human blood. Their mist-like pattern was consistent with being high-velocity blood spatter, which are produced by the blowback from a firearm. The evidence contradicted Michael Fletcher's claim that he was not in the room when his wife was shot. More importantly, the blood on the cuff put him within 2 feet of the victim when the bullet struck her head. Police finally had enough evidence to arrest Michael Fletcher. And it came just in time. When police arrived, they found the suspect near a camper parked in front of the house. Michael Fletcher was placed under arrest and charged with the murder of his pregnant wife.
The prosecution's contention is that this was a orchestrated, well-planned homicide that took months to carry out. He'd been nice to her for months. He'd been sweet-talking her, getting into her good graces. Bought her a card that morning, not because he loved her, but because he needed an alibi. Took her to the gun range, not because he wanted her to share a hobby with him, but because he needed to get gunpowder on her hands.
But this case was not over. On August 19th, the day of Leanne's funeral, Michael Fletcher's lawyer was granted the right to a second autopsy by a renowned medical examiner. But he was at a disadvantage because the victim's body had been cleaned, embalmed, and her skull reconstructed. However, based on his experience and the size and location of the wound, he believed that it was plausible that the gunshot wound had been self-inflicted.
Dr. Dragovich did the first autopsy, and his conclusion was pretty obvious. This is murder. This is not accidental or self-inflicted. The defense hired their own medical examiner. His results weren't conclusive at all, which is fine for the defense. They just wanted someone to say, this is not clear-cut.
But ultimately, those findings were not enough to create reasonable doubt in the minds of jurors.
What's the big deal? Why can't you...
The evidence suggested that when Michael Fletcher learned his wife was pregnant, he realized that his relationship with his mistress would be destroyed. And there was too much at stake to simply let that happen. After returning from the firing range, Michael saw his opportunity and took it. Michael Fletcher was convicted of homicide in the second degree and sentenced to life in prison. Murder is the most senseless of human tragedies, and strangely, the most compelling. Writers are compelled to write about it. Readers are compelled to read of it. And though forensics can never explain why someone is driven to kill, it can provide us with the satisfaction of bringing the guilty to justice. In Hawaii, investigators find a body inside a makeshift coffin. But to find the killer, they must first rely on insects to help them identify the victim. A body is discovered under a pile of curbside trash in Oklahoma. Though police identify a suspect, it falls to a bug expert to prove murder. In Mississippi, a young family is found brutally murdered in a rural home. To expose a killer's guilt, examiners must find a way to establish when they died. When a killer leaves no trace of himself at a crime scene, investigators can turn to the insects left behind for answers. Forensic entomologists can find justice for the victims of homicide by following the trails of predators and parasites. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. On October 24th, 1994, a man driving along the old Cali Highway in Oahu, Hawaii, noticed something lying in the woods just off the road. As he approached the object, he realized it was a large toolbox. Curious as to what he had found, he pried the box open. Inside were the badly decomposed remains of a human body. He called 911. Officers and forensic technicians from the Honolulu Police Department responded to the scene. Blunt force trauma on the skull indicated this individual had been murdered. No form of identification was located near the male victim's remains. Hundreds of insects were found in and around the makeshift coffin. Having found little evidence to tell them who this victim was or when he had been murdered, investigators contacted renowned forensic entomologist Dr. Lee Goff. As an expert in insect growth and development, Dr. Goff analyzes bugs found on a corpse and estimates how much time has elapsed since a person's death. In the toolbox, he found over 250 species of insects, including a colony of long-legged ants that had nested inside the victim's skull. After collecting dozens of samples, he returned to his lab at the University of Hawaii. An examination of the skeletal remains revealed that the male victim was between 50 and 60 years of age and approximately 6 feet tall. Damage to the skull was consistent with injuries caused by massive blunt force trauma. Other than observing that the victim had extensive bridge work done on his teeth, no other identifying features were found. Investigators began searching through previously filed missing persons reports, looking for a match with their victim. Though there were a few potential matches, homicide detective Hal Fitchett knew that until they could be certain of the man's identity, solving this case would be nearly impossible.
In all homicide cases, you've got to make identification of the body or skeletal remains in any case to make it solid for a jury to understand that this was a victim and this is how he died and this is who he was and how it happened.
In order to firmly establish the male victim's identity, investigators first needed to determine when he died. Dr. Lee Goff believed that the insects found in the makeshift coffin held the answers.
Typically, what we look at are life cycles of individual insects or succession patterns of insects onto the body. As the first fly lays its egg and starts the clock, the eggs hatch, the maggots begin to feed on the body, they change the body. And as they do this, they make the body attractive to yet another group of insects, and you have successive waves of insects invading this particular body, each one utilizing a different part of the body.
Among the various insects found, Dr. Goff identified the black soldier fly. Entomological research has shown that the black soldier fly will not become attracted to a body until decomposition has been underway for at least 30 days. But Dr. Goff also located newly hatched fly larvae, or maggots, that had come from the black soldier fly. Knowing it takes an additional 60 days from the time the soldier fly arrives to the time its eggs hatch and begin to mature into adults, he concluded that the victim had been deceased for at least 90 days. But the presence of the ant colony inside the skull indicated the victim had been dead much longer.
The ants were there basically looking for a somewhat dry place in which to establish their colony. They were looking at a protected type of an environment, a good place to establish the colony. And they're primarily just as a shelter, as opposed to using the body as a food source.
To determine when this victim died, Dr. Goff now needed to determine how long the ant colony had been present inside the toolbox. He began research into how ant colonies grow and develop.
You're going to find several different forms that are going to be present within the colony, each one doing a different job. Initially, you're just producing workers, servicing the queen, making sure the colony is maintained, obtaining food. But then you reach a certain colony size. At that point, this colony is large enough that they want to look at establishing other colonies.
Generally, a colony reaches that size in 12 months. Then the queen begins producing other reproductive ants. Dr. Goff found such ants, identifiable by their wings, which allow them to leave the colony and go on to form their own. Knowing that the ants had not arrived until the soldier fly larvae began to hatch, Dr. Goff estimated that the victim had been dead about 15 months. But then he factored in additional time it would have taken for the insects to penetrate the toolbox. Ultimately, he estimated the victim died 18 months before his body was discovered. Using Dr. Goff's analysis, investigators were quickly able to identify a missing persons report filed 18 months earlier that closely matched their victim's description. They contacted the man's family members. The children told police that their father, 55-year-old Charles Osborne, had disappeared in April 1993. They had last spoken with him on the phone shortly before he disappeared. Charles, a father of 3, was the co-owner of a marble and tile installation business. He was described as a dedicated craftsman who took great pride in his business and the quality of his work. The family didn't believe he would have just walked away from his livelihood. Co-workers said that they last saw him at a job site in Waikiki, where he was in the process of remodeling condominiums. Photographs of Charles Osborne were handed over to police. Looking to verify that the victim found in the toolbox was in fact Charles Osborne, investigators forwarded the photograph and the skull to the nearby United States Army Central Identification Laboratory. There, forensic anthropologists have spent years trying to match human remains found around the world to military personnel who have been classified as missing in action since the Second World War. To identify the remains, Dr. Robert Mann uses a process called video superimposition. Using photographs of a missing serviceman, examiners use video cameras to generate an image of the face. The image is then projected onto a monitor. Then, the face is superimposed onto a video image of the unidentified skull. Guided by the spatial arrangements that make each person's face unique, examiners look to see if the bone structures line up with the contours of the face in the photograph.
You take the skull that is recovered from a site, and then you take a photograph of the individual who you think it could be. And using two different cameras, you overlay those images, and you match up the bony landmarks beneath the skin with the features that you see above in the skin overlying the bone.
Using photographs of the skull found in the toolbox and pictures of Charles Osborne, examiners looked for similarities. Using the extensive dental work as their guide, examiners found a perfect match with the suspected victim. The man found murdered inside the toolbox had been positively identified as Charles Osborne. Now, investigators needed to find out who had put him there and why. By analyzing the insects recovered from a crime scene, forensic entomologist Dr. Lee Goff had helped authorities identify decomposed human remains. "55-year-old contractor Charles Osborne had been murdered 18 months before and his body hidden inside a toolbox. Now, police in Honolulu, Hawaii struggled to identify his killer. Looking to retrace the victim's movements prior to his death, investigators tracked down other contractors who worked with Osborne around the time he disappeared. They recalled that the last time they saw him, he had gotten into a heated argument with his business partner. While working to remodel condominiums in Waikiki, his partner and longtime friend Ross Horton said he needed more money to finish the job. Osborne refused. In fact, he accused Horton of using company money to purchase drugs. Ross Horton denied the accusation and then stormed off the job site. When they returned to the condos the following day, there was no sign of Charles Osborne. However, they noticed a pool of reddish-brown liquid on the floor. Believing it to be some sort of cleaning solution, they thought nothing of it. The construction workers agreed to accompany investigators to the former job site in Waikiki. Though nearly 2 years had passed, they hoped to uncover evidence of murder. Criminalists began searching the residence. Though the floors had been tiled over and the walls painted, technicians managed to locate a few minute traces of what appeared to be human blood. The samples were collected and sent on for a more detailed analysis.
That's just where they failed to clean it.
In the lab, examiners compared the genetic profile of the blood found in the apartment to known samples of the victim. They matched. Something violent had happened to Charles Osborne inside that condo.
It doesn't just notify the people that carries
And for homicide detective Hal Fitchett, all of the circumstantial evidence pointed to Ross Horton.
So now the objective was to locate Ross Horton. And we contacted individuals here with the state of Hawaii, and they were able to give us possible or potential addresses where Mr. Horton may be residing. So I did follow up with those areas, and I did locate an address.
Ross Horton was ultimately tracked down to an address in Oakland, California. Police there were notified, and when Horton showed up for work, he was taken into custody. Honolulu detectives traveled to California to interview the suspect. Horton was shocked that after so much time, police were able to identify Charles Osborne's remains.
We've got the evidence. Why don't you start writing?
Confronted with the evidence against him, Horton confessed to the murder. Horton said that after the other contractors had left the job site the day he and Osborne argued, he returned to confront his partner. He needed money to buy drugs. But when Osborne refused to give him more company money, he became enraged. The confrontation escalated into a fight, which quickly spiraled out of control. Later that evening, to conceal his crime, Horton placed Charles Osborne's body inside his toolbox and disposed of it off the side of a highway. A jury found Ross Horton guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison. With the help of Dr. Lee Goff's insect analysis, authorities were able to identify the victim and his killer. In Oklahoma, investigators must also rely on bugs, but this time to disprove a murder suspect's alibi. On the morning of August 8, 1993, in the small town of Stroud, Oklahoma, a resident on her way to work suddenly became overwhelmed by a foul odor. It was coming from a large pile of trash in front of her neighbor's home. She examined the garbage, concerned about a potential health hazard. Then, she noticed a human hand protruding from the debris. She quickly called 911. Dispatchers learned that the residence where the body was found belonged to 44-year-old Lito Cisneros and his wife, Linda Howell. When police arrived, they began rummaging through the trash. Under the mountain of debris, wrapped in a blanket, investigators found the lifeless body of a middle-aged man. From cuts and bloodstains on his t-shirt, it was clear he had been stabbed to death. Technicians collected all of the garbage, including fly larvae that had covered the body. Neighbors confirmed that the victim was in fact Lito Cisneros. And they hadn't seen his wife, Linda Howell, or Lito's vehicle in some time. Fearing there could be more victims inside, investigators cautiously made their way into the house. No one, including the victim's wife, appeared to be home. Agent Jackie Johnson of the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation worked the case.
When we entered the house and we couldn't locate Linda, who we had been told also lived there, we were very concerned for her welfare because the car had been missing, so we were also afraid that she was a victim.
Their fears appeared to be well-founded. In the kitchen, there were signs that a violent struggle had taken place. Technicians found blood spatter on the wall and floorboards. And hidden beneath the refrigerator, investigators located a steak knife. The evidence was collected and sent to the crime lab for processing. Oklahoma authorities were faced with a dead body and a missing woman. An APB was immediately put out on Lito's vehicle. Investigators knew that if they didn't come up with answers, and quickly, more victims could turn up. Authorities in Stroud, Oklahoma, had few clues in the murder of 44-year-old Lito Cisneros, whose body was found under a pile of trash in front of his home. With the victim's wife and the couple's vehicle unaccounted for, authorities struggled for answers. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that Lito Cisneros had died as a result of multiple stab wounds to the head and chest. A knife with a 5/8 of an inch wide blade had caused the fatal injuries. The level of decomposition indicated that Lito had been dead a few days, but with the additional insect activity, it was difficult to pinpoint a specific time of death. Further examination failed to yield any clues to the killer's identity. Police turned to forensic examiners at the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation's crime lab. There, examiners scrutinized the knife found hidden under the victim's refrigerator for clues. The blade measured 5/8 of an inch wide, the same dimension as the weapon that caused the fatal injuries. But technicians could find no traces of blood on the blade. The handle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. Desperate to generate a lead, investigators began interviewing local residents. One recalled seeing Lito at a bar on Thursday, August 4th, 4 days before his body was found. And she said he wasn't alone. According to the witness, Lito and his wife Linda Howell got into a heated argument, and that was not unusual. Linda began screaming at her husband, humiliating him in front of the other patrons. The witness also overheard Linda threatening to kill Lito before she stormed out of the bar. Lito followed her out and never returned. The witness had not seen Lito since that night. But she had seen Linda Howell heading out of town in Lito's car a few days later.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Suddenly, investigators were no longer concerned that the victim's wife was in any kind of danger. Agent Jackie Johnson.
We found that Linda had been seen 2 or 3 days following Lito's last sighting, and therefore we were aware that she was okay, and she had also been seen in Lito's car. The fact that she had left town made us suspicious that she might have been involved.
But efforts to locate her and the missing vehicle had been unsuccessful.
Yeah, about a half hour.
Then, a week later, a farmer in a nearby county found an abandoned vehicle parked on his property. A check on the license plates revealed that it belonged to Lito Cisneros. And according to the farmer, it had only been there a day. Linda Howell had to be close by. Within hours, authorities learned that Linda had friends that lived close to where the vehicle had been abandoned. The area was put under surveillance. A short while later, the tactic paid off. Police spotted a car passing through the small town. And sitting in the passenger seat was a woman fitting Linda Howell's description. When questioned, the woman identified herself as Linda Howell. She was taken into custody and then transported back to Stroud, Oklahoma. When questioned, Linda admitted that she and Lito had gotten into a fight at the bar on Thursday evening, August 4th. but she claimed she and Lito had made up by the following morning. In fact, things were going well between them. But on Saturday, August 6th, her ex-husband, Lucky Lee Lancaster, showed up at their house unexpectedly. Lancaster wanted to get back together with his ex-wife.
I didn't hear anything, and so I believed him.
When the two men began to argue, Linda took off. When she returned a short while later, Lucky was standing in the kitchen, holding a bloody knife. He had killed Lito during the fight. Linda Howell was placed under arrest for her role in covering up the murder.
If you decide to answer questions now without your lawyer being present, you have the right to
She believed that after the murder, her ex-husband returned home to California.
answer any further questions. Understand?
We contacted Lucky's parents, and they were very accommodating and giving us an address where we could contact Lucky in California. We contacted the California officials, and they located him on the beach and actually brought him in for us to speak with.
Authorities traveled to San Clemente, California to speak with the suspect. They learned that for the past several months, Lucky had been living in a homeless shelter. Under questioning, he insisted he had not spoken to Linda Howell in more than a year and denied that he was recently in Oklahoma. A review of the shelter's records corroborated his statements.
He would sign in for his food every day and show an identification. And by checking those records, we were able to establish that he had been in California 6 to 7 months and had not left California prior to the homicide.
That meant Linda Howell's story was a lie. Now she explained her marriage to Lito was rocky, and without an alibi, she knew she would be blamed for her husband's death. She said the last time she saw Lito was on Saturday morning, August 6th, when he left town to visit some friends. When he hadn't returned by the following day, she decided to visit friends of her own in a nearby county. It seemed someone was trying to frame her for the murder. Investigators weren't buying the story. To prove that Linda had killed her husband, investigators needed to establish that Lito was already dead on August 6th, the day Linda claimed she last saw her husband alive. The only evidence authorities had to firmly establish a time of death were the insects collected from the victim's body. The bugs were sent to forensic entomologist Dr. Neil Haskell, a professor at St. Joseph's University in Rensselaer, Indiana.
The Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation investigator, Jackie Johnson, had collected entomological evidence, primarily maggots, from the decedent's body. We can use those maggots, larvae of a particular species of fly, to estimate how long the body's been there based on their growth and development of these insect life stages.
Dr. Haskell has spent the last 18 years researching the relationship between insects and decomposing human remains. To understand that relationship and to determine the life cycles of insects on a corpse, most of his studies have been done using pigs that have died of natural causes.
Pigs are readily available anywhere in the world, and many of the pig organs and tissues are almost identical to the human organs and tissues. So we find that it is a very adequate model to, and probably the closest animal we can find, and we find relatively no difference in the rate of decomposition of humans and pigs, nor do we find any difference in the insects or the sequence of insects that are attracted to both humans and pigs.
Based on those studies, Dr. Haskell concluded that the common blowfly larvae collected from the crime scene were in the 3rd stage of development, meaning they were very close to becoming adult flies. But to determine how long it took them to reach that stage, Dr. Haskell consulted the weather data for the days leading up to the discovery of the body. Heat speeds up the development process. Cold slows it down. He found it hadn't been warm enough from August 6th to August 8th to account for the advanced stage of development. That meant Lito could not have died on August 6th, as Linda had claimed. His death likely occurred more than 90 hours before he was discovered, which would put the murder in the late evening hours of Thursday, August 4th, the night Lito and Linda fought at the bar.
Entomologically, this was very easy to prove because we had fully mature 3rd stage maggots and we had the temperatures available for their growth and development, and it was very consistent with more of a 96-hour interval time of death rather than the 36-hour interval. And so we could refute the 36-hour interval as not being true, and we went with the 96-hour interval, which was consistent with her being with her husband, the decedent, at that time, and him dying shortly after she was with him.
Dr. Haskell contacted Agent Johnson with his findings. Linda Howell was subsequently charged with murder. Police believe that after arriving home from the bar on Thursday evening, August 4th, the fight between Linda Howell and Lito Cisneros escalated. After stabbing him to death, Linda dragged his body to the curb, covered him with debris, and left him with the garbage to be picked up in a few days. Based on Dr. Haskell's analysis, Linda Howell pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. An hour's drive from the Mississippi state capital of Jackson, the rural community of Summit offers an escape from bustling city life. It's a sleepy little town, and in 1993, it seemed an ideal place for one family to spend some quality time together. On the evening of December 16th, police received a frantic 911 call. A man reported that he had discovered his family dead inside his remote vacation home. Officers from the Pike County Sheriff's Office and from the Mississippi Highway Patrol were dispatched to the scene.
Yeah,
50-year-old Michael Rubenstein told the officers that when he hadn't heard from his 24-year-old stepson, Darrell Perry, in some time, he drove from his Louisiana home to check on him. When he entered the residence, Michael found Darrell and Darrell's 22-year-old wife, Annie, dead. Annie's 4-year-old daughter, Crystal, was also dead. When detectives made their way into the residence, they were immediately struck by the smell of natural gas. In the living room, police found the badly decomposed bodies of Darrell and Annie Perry. In an adjacent bedroom, police found the lifeless body of Crystal lying in her bed. Police removed the bodies and sent them for autopsy. The following day, investigators from the Mississippi Highway Patrol began looking for clues to explain the deaths. Aside from the smell of natural gas, Detective Alan Applewhite was left with few answers.
Due to the state of decomposition, there was no way that we could determine the cause of death. The room was not disturbed in any means. It didn't look like there'd been a struggle. We had 2 victims in the den area with nothing out of place.
Police turned to the medical examiner for answers. The level of decay and the development stage of insects observed on the bodies suggested the family had been dead at least 2 weeks. That meant they had likely died in early December. Believing a gas leak inside the residence was responsible for the deaths, the coroner began a more detailed analysis. Almost immediately, he realized these deaths were not accidental. Both Darrell Perry and 22-year-old Annie had died from multiple stab wounds. Crystal had been strangled. The young family found dead inside an isolated Mississippi vacation home had been brutally murdered. After autopsies revealed that a family of 3 had been the victims of homicide, police in Pike County, Mississippi returned to the remote vacation home where the bodies had been discovered. Now they were looking for clues that could lead them to the killer. But investigators found no signs of forced entry, and all the windows were securely shut. Technicians processed every surface, hoping to find any fingerprints that may have been left behind. But they found none. Whoever had committed these murders had been very careful not to leave any traces behind. The lack of any signs of a violent struggle or forced entry led investigators to suspect that the victims likely knew their killer. Hopeful the victim's family could provide useful information, investigators traveled to Louisiana to interview Darrell Perry's mother, Doris, and her husband, Michael Rubenstein, who had discovered the bodies. Michael explained that he had driven the family to his remote Mississippi retreat in early November. His stepson, Darrell, and Darrell's wife, Annie, had recently gotten back together after a long separation. Annie's young daughter from a previous marriage desperately needed a father figure in her life. For her sake, Darrell and Annie wanted to make the marriage work. They hoped some quiet time together as a family would make them closer. Michael offered to let them stay at his Mississippi residence. He said he last spoke to Darrell by phone on November 16th.
But the last time I talked to them,
According to Darrell, everything was going fine. But after a month went by without a word, Michael returned to the residence on December 16th. That's when he discovered the bodies. The Rubensteins told police that while Darrell and Annie were separated, Annie had dated a reputed drug dealer named Tony Harris. Harris was rumored to be a violent man. Police quickly located the suspect and brought him in for questioning. But Tony Harris denied any knowledge of the murders. And he had a solid alibi for the first week of December, when the murders had likely occurred.
Exactly.
He later agreed to take a polygraph test, which indicated he was telling the truth.
No, because of the trees that was
The investigation ground to a halt.
12, that's about 12:50.
How you doing, Mr. Perry? Have a seat, please.
Then, a few days later, Darrell Perry's brother, David, came in to speak with police.
I just wanted to come in. I thought it was an important...
David believed their stepfather, Michael Rubenstein, had committed the murders. He said that he, Darrell, and their stepfather had been involved in insurance scams for years. And from past experience, David believed that Michael Rubenstein would have no problem killing for money.
David gave information that Rubenstein and he and Darrell and other family members had been involved in over the years, that Rubenstein primarily made a living off of insurance scams. He told us of a death where a hunting accident where a partner was killed back in 1979.
Following up on the lead, investigators reviewed the case files for the 1979 death of Rubenstein's business partner. According to court documents, the business partner was killed during a hunting trip when Rubenstein's gun accidentally misfired. No criminal charges were ever brought. But 2 weeks before the accident, the partner had made Rubenstein a beneficiary of his life insurance policy. But when Rubenstein tried to collect on the policy, the insurance company refused to pay. He decided to take the insurance company to court.
Your Honor, one never knows when tragedy is going to strike, and the premiums...
But the law stated that if the policyholder dies within 2 years of signing the paperwork, the insurance company is not required to pay. Rubenstein was reportedly furious at the decision. Believing they were closing in on a suspect and a motive, detectives began interviewing other family members. They learned that Rubenstein had taken a $250,000 life insurance policy on 4-year-old Crystal.
$250,000.
And the policy was dated 2 years and 2 months before the young girl was found murdered. Though incriminating, it didn't prove murder.
We knew now of a motive, which was a $250,000 life insurance policy, and it was just not enough for the DA to accept the case.
When Mississippi police reviewed witness statements, however, they found something that had previously gone overlooked.
So that's very important.
Several residents who lived near the vacation home where the victims were found murdered had seen Rubenstein in town on November 16th. The suspect previously claimed he hadn't gone to the residence until mid-December, when he discovered the bodies. To prove murder, investigators needed to establish that the family died during Rubenstein's trip to Mississippi in mid-November, not in early December, as the coroner had indicated. And the only evidence detectives had were photographs of the insects taken at the crime scene. Authorities in Summit, Mississippi believed that a $250,000 life insurance policy had led 50-year-old Michael Rubenstein to murder his stepson and his stepson's young wife and child. Though the suspect had been seen near the crime scene on November 16, 1993, the coroner's report indicated the family had died in early December. To resolve the conflicting information and firmly establish a time of death, detectives contacted esteemed forensic anthropologist Dr. William Bass of the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. For more than 30 years, Dr. Bass has conducted research at a 3-acre facility known as the Body Farm. Using human bodies that have been donated for scientific research, Dr. Bass has become an expert in how individuals decompose after death.
In law enforcement, you're frequently called upon to determine the length of time since death. And to do that, you need to know what the decay rate is and what the decay sequence is in humans. So this is one of the things that I got interested in, is determining the length of time since death. And in order to do that, then you need to look at how the body decays, how long does it take for that decay to occur, what are the factors like temperature and the insects and so forth that help you to determine the length of time since death.
The larvae of the common blowfly observed in crime scene photographs were about 14 days old, suggesting the family died in early December. But that didn't tell the whole story. When Dr. Bass examined the remains and factored in the temperature data, he concluded from the level of decomposition that the victims had been dead a month before they were discovered on December 16th. After examining photographs of the home where the bodies were found, Dr. Bass believed he could explain the inconsistency.
Now, I agree that maggots are only 14 days old, but you've got two things going on at the same time. You've got these bodies decaying inside of a house. You've got the flies outside of the house. It takes the flies a few days to begin to get the smell. Hey, there's a dead body in there. Then they have to figure out, how do I get from outside inside so I can lay my eggs on this decaying body? Bill, this is Dr. Bass at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
After weighing all of the evidence, Dr. Bass concluded these victims had been dead 25 to 35 days before being discovered. That put the time of death at mid-November, exactly when Michael Rubenstein had been seen near the residence. Based on Dr. Bass's analysis, Mississippi authorities now had enough evidence to arrest Michael Rubenstein. He was charged with 3 counts of murder. Police believe that when Michael's financial problems became too much, he began plotting to kill his family members and then profit from their deaths. On November 16, 1993, 2 years after taking out a life insurance policy on 4-year-old Crystal, he drove to the residence where Darryl, Annie, and the child were spending time together. There, he brutally murdered the young family.
Hey, Mike.
50-year-old Michael Rubenstein received 2 life sentences for the stabbing deaths of Darryl and Annie Perry. For the murder of 4-year-old Crystal, he received the death penalty. Some killers are skilled at removing any trace of themselves from a crime scene. But nature has its own way of leaving clues behind. Forensic entomologists can kickstart a dying investigation and find proof of murder by uncovering evidence left behind by predators and parasites.